Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gorilla Whale, a Godzilla watch-along podcast. I am your kaiju consultant, Kevin Carpenter.
And I am the weird adult neighbor mentoring stray nerdy children, Kayla Knutson.
Today, we are talking about objectively a low point in the Godzilla franchise, and that is the movie All Monsters Attack, aka Godzilla's Revenge. Two titles that make absolutely no sense given what actually happens in this movie.
This one was a rough one, kids.
Yep.
The best thing I can say for it was that it was short, at least.
It is a doubly fake movie. It is a movie that at the end you're like, why did they make this? This feels like a waste of time. And the issue with this movie too is that the core concept itself, which is a kid with a shit life, imagines his giant monster best friend in order to learn how to deal with bullies, and also has like a little discount Home Alone plot, would actually be an alright concept for a kid's movie. The fact that they make this a Godzilla movie and also make it out of other Godzilla movies, just it's a patchwork clip show. It's so bad. It's so bad.
I would say that this is giving big TV movie energy, but this did release theatrically, didn't it?
It did. So it did not release in first run theaters. It actually released for a kids festival called. Hang on. Let me do the historical context real quick.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
you'll answer my question.
Yeah, I'll answer
there.
the question in historical context. Let me not get ahead of myself. So let me just jump right into this because this movie is 70 minutes long. And it is mercifully short, and honestly kind of want to keep this episode that way because this movie, goddamn. All right, so historical context. In July 1969, Apollo 11 lands on the moon. Millions around the world watch as Neil Armstrong takes one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. But back on Earth, things aren't looking so great for Toho. The movie industry is continuing to become less and less profitable in Japan. Latitude Zero, a previous film by Ishiro Honda released in early 1969, was also a box office failure. Although they just released a film where every kaiju waved to the camera, signaling their final goodbyes, Toho's getting right back on that Godzilla train 1 year later. Here's the rough timeline. The first draft of the script is turned in September. Production starts in October. The movie comes out in December. Specifically, it is released for the Toho Champion Festival, which is a film festival aimed at children and held during the months when school was not in session. Because of the low budget and rushed timeline, entire fight scenes are cut from Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, and Son of Godzilla and just slapped right into the film. Who's gonna notice?
I noticed.
Here is a quote from Ishiro Honda, A Life in Film from Godzilla to Kurosawa. Quote, "The company wanted a lot of monsters, but they told us they had no money. We decided to take on one of the social problems of that time, the latchkey kid. We set it up that the kid liked monsters, so he pretends and makes it all real. This one got to be really popular and made a lot of money, and it is one of my favorites as well." End quote. Honda, I don't agree with you on that, but we're going to talk about why you have that opinion, because I have an idea. Anyway.
I also have an idea on why he has that opinion. Perhaps it is the same idea, and it's very, very understandable, if it is what I'm thinking it is.
Well, last bit of context. On December 20th, 1969, All Monsters Attack is released. So, the reason I think Honda likes this movie is because it does actually directly tackle a social issue. Mm-hmm. Honda loves tackling social issues in his films, and the original Godzilla was very much about the looming specter of atomic annihilation and how we need to get our nuclear weapon stuff figured out, or else there will be another Godzilla. And then ironically, he had to make 8 or 9 more Godzillas, each of them dealing less and less with social problems and more about monsters wrestling each other. Like we had King Kong versus Godzilla, where it's talking about the horrors of spectacle, and Mothra versus Godzilla, which touched on industrialization and greed. But like, truly, what was the point of Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, or Son of Godzilla, besides we need to make another Godzilla?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying this on the podcast where we overanalyze this shit.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's because he is tackling a social problem. I also think it's because I imagine that this was quite popular at the Children's Festival. And so I could see him having a fondness for the film because it's something that a lot of kids really liked and spoke to them. A lot of people that make films are like nerdy and may or may not have been kind of like indoor kids or like kind of lonely or had to like, they played pretend and that nurtured their imagination and then thus their love of storytelling. And so it could be that Honda sees a lot of himself in this kid who is escaping his troubles with his own imagination, and telling this story to himself and sort of encouraging that tool in other younger children who see that movie. Like, I could see that this is all speculation. I could see that being a reason why he is also fond of the film.
Yeah, this is definitely a movie about escapism. And also, the latchkey kid thing, for those who don't know, latchkey kids are those whose parents are usually working or just absent for reasons. And so these kids would just spend a lot of time at home alone. And this was a big thing that was hitting Japan in the late 60s and early 70s due to the post-war economic boom, but also this rising trend of dual income households. Mm-hmm. So latchkey kids were just a thing that was happening a lot in Japan. Couple that with the widespread industrialization, which we touched on in Mothra versus Godzilla, and it only got even more widespread from there, which this movie also touches on.
I believe in America, the great era of the latchkey kid was Gen X. So it would have been in the late 70s and the 80s and perhaps the early 90s. Gen X likes to remind everybody that their parents left them alone, home alone a lot. Mm-hmm. And they were all latchkey kids that were raised by the television and whatnot. It's interesting though, because my parents both worked, but also, my grandmother lived with us for a little while, and I would go to after school daycares. So was that maybe after school daycares just were less of a thing before the late 90s and early 2000s. So that wasn't as much of an option. And then it was also, the after school daycares. And then it was my grandmother was home. So I just went home and she was there. And then also my dad worked really early mornings. So he was often done with work around the time that I was done with school. So it's not like he wasn't working, but then for a lot of my childhood, he was home in the afternoons just because he was done with the workday by 3 or 4 or whatever, because he'd start work so early. Also, my mom worked from home when I was a kid too, for a good chunk of that. So I would come home and she's home working, which is awkward because it's you got to leave her alone. But it's it's not like I wasn't fully home alone, So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like the concept of the latchkey kid sort of, I don't know if it was as much of a thing, even though dual income households still are. I don't know. Were you considered a latchkey kid?
Sort of. My parents both worked full-time jobs, and there was a period where I also just lived with my mom. So I pretty much had to do after school sports because my mom didn't want me to come home right after school and just be alone for hours. But even then, my mom would get off late enough at work that even after I was done with wrestling practice, I would still have to hang out at the local library for a little bit before I could get picked up or bum a ride off someone else in the wrestling team. So I was so my mom was you need to get into after school stuff so you don't become a latchkey kid. I'm all right.
That was the same thing. I was doing a lot of after school I think that's the difference between, I guess, Gen X and millennials and Gen Z is that we were put into after school programs, and maybe after school programs, they were less accessible in the 80s. and 90s, so it wasn't as much of a thing. And then maybe what it was, and I don't know if anybody has any actual knowledge on any of this, feel free to let us know, because it is kind of curious. I wonder if they were like, these latchkey kids, this is a bit of a problem. We need to provide more infrastructure for after school programs. Because I remember one of the after school programs I did was just like, we would go and hang out after school. You'd get out of school and you would go to the library and check in, and you would work on your homework, or you could read. I don't think we were allowed to go on the computers. It was either you can work on your homework or you can read until like 5 o'clock when the program would end. It was like 5 or 5:30 or something. And it was just a way, the school providing a very cheap like daycare opportunity. And then there would be teachers there. So if you needed some help with your homework, there would be teachers, or maybe it was like high school like volunteers or something. I don't quite remember if it was like middle schoolers maybe getting some community service points by helping the younger kids with homework and things like that, you know. But that was definitely a thing, I remember. And then in high school I was like in after school programs. So yeah. And it was really nice once I got my license when I was 16, and I was lucky enough to get a hand-me-down car. So it was really cool because then I could just leave. I would leave school senior year. I'd leave school after my classes got done early, go back home, and then come back for my after school programs.
Yeah.
So and my brother was, I was the older sibling. So my brother wasn't a latchkey kid because then I'd be home.
Yeah. And that's another thing is like, you know, there's a lot of kids who don't have siblings looking after them. But also if you have siblings, then those siblings are charged with looking after you. And that's a whole other social issue right there. I think this is one of the reasons why Honda liked making this movie. As I said, Honda is tackling a big social issue in Japan at the time.
Yeah.
And then in later Showa Godzilla movies, we are going to be hitting the social issue of pollution face first, but that's for the next episode.
Oh boy, yeah. And like for clarification, my brother was doing after school programs as well. Mm-hmm. So I was not for the entirety of like my adolescence and his early childhood tasked solely with babysitting him. It would be a lot of like, he'd go over, he had a friend who had a grandparent that was like stay at home, you know? Mm-hmm. So he'd go over to their house for a couple of hours after school. And that gave me time to kind of get a head start on my homework, or I would do my after school programs or whatever. And then I'd like come pick him up.
And that's the thing. This is a movie that both of us can have a personal stake in, but because of how it was produced and just how it was made, it's just like, just feels like a waste of time. But let's get into the exact reasons why here as I jump into the summary. Yeah,
enough unpacking our own psychology and social issues.
So, All Monsters Attack, 1969, aka Godzilla's Revenge. Two titles that make absolutely no sense. I gotta hammer that home. It's so funny. In an industrial Japanese neighborhood of belching factories and loud traffic, young boy Ichiro Miki is often left alone by his mother and father, who are always working late. Ichiro also has problems with a gang of bullies, led by a tall boy who Ichiro calls Gabara. The gang of bullies corner Ichiro and try to pressure him into honking a nearby motorcycle horn and startling a man on a ladder who is painting a sign. Pretty low bar stuff in terms of bullying. Ichiro refuses and runs away while the bullies call him a chicken. Ichiro returns to his apartment complex, where he hangs out with kindly old toy maker Shinpei Minami. Shinpei is showing off a small computer he built that shows footage of the moon landing. But Ichiro isn't interested in the moon, he's interested in Monster Island. A quick note. The previous movie, Destroy All Monsters, takes place in the far-off year of 1999, so all of the Showa movies after it technically take place before it. All Monsters Attack is in an even weirder spot in terms of continuity, because it's not really clear whether the kaiju exist in this world and Ichiro is a weird fan of them, or if they're all imaginary in this world and he made them up. Either way, the Monster Island he refers to isn't the kaiju prison controlled by the UN, but rather an island where all the monsters just hang out. Oh, and it's also all in his imagination. Ichiro goes to sleep and dreams of riding on a passenger plane to Monster Island. When he arrives, Ichiro witnesses Manda, Gorosaurus, and Anguirus, all with footage taken from previous movies. He also sees Godzilla fight the Kamacuras and a giant condor. All of these scenes are depicted with footage from previous movies as well, and this will continue throughout the rest of the film. Ichiro runs away from the remaining Kamacuras and then falls down a hole. But thankfully, someone lowers a vine for him to climb out of the hole. That someone is Manila. Manila in this movie is the size of a small child, and he can talk.
Okay. He is the size of a small child. Does that mean Gabara is the size of an adult? Because at one point, Manila charges Gabara, and you can see like the height difference, and he comes up to like his like chest, like it looks like small child on adult.
No. So Manila can change his size in this movie.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. Okay, it's of course silly me.
There's a brief scene where Manila goes to his regular, more giant size, but instead of doing like a cool transformation effect, it's literally just like 4 frames of like him small, him a little larger, him a little larger. All right, now he's back to his regular size. There's no like flashing lights anything like that.
How could I have missed that?
It's such great special
stared
effects.
Into the distance, zoned out, and contemplated all my life choices that led to me watching this movie. Carry on.
Manila and Ichiro become fast friends, and they bond over their mutual problems. Manila also has a bully, a weird dinosaur hyena monster known as Gabara. But before they can hang out more, Ichiro is woken up by Shinpei the toy maker. Ichiro has to deal with the real world again. I know, Ichiro. He has another run-in with the bullies, and Ichiro runs into an abandoned factory to get away from them. While he's hiding, Ichiro finds a pair of headphones and a driver's license, which he takes once the coast is clear. Unfortunately, 2 bank robbers named Senbayashi and Okuda were hiding out there from the police, and Ichiro just took one of their IDs. Ooh. After dinner with Shinpei, Ichiro goes back to sleep and dreams of Monster Island once more. Within the dream, Ichiro is chased by Gabara. After he gets away, he meets with Manila once more. Manila talks about how awesome his dad Godzilla is, and the 2 children watch as Godzilla beats up Ebirah and Kumonga in quick succession. These fight scenes are, once again, lifted straight from Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, and Son of Godzilla, which means we see Godzilla's face change 3 different times very quickly, because he's wearing different suits in all 3 of these movies.
Yes, to be incredibly clear, when Kevin says lifted straight, he doesn't mean that they copied and refilmed it. It's the literal actual footage from these. They reused footage from those other movies. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes people say, oh, it's lifted straight, and it's like copied word for word. No, it's the actual footage from those movies. It's the same scenes, just cut into this movie.
Same scenes, same Godzilla suits that they use for those movies. So it's literally like Godzilla will turn and he's fighting Ebirah and he's wearing the Ebirah suit, and then he'll run to the left side of the screen and then he'll come out and he'll fight Kumonga, the giant spider, and he's wearing the Son of Godzilla suit. And then it'll cut over to Godzilla talking to Manila, and he's wearing the Destroy All Monsters suit that he rewore for this movie. And all 3 of those suits look very different.
Yeah.
But it's like one after the other. Godzilla is just anamorphing this whole movie.
Yeah. It's a little rough.
It's a little rough. I you know what? Watching the Ebirah fight scene again, I miss the surfer rock. I miss the guitar.
Oh. Yeah, there's no surfer rock. They use different audio.
Listen, this is not the first time these movies have reused footage, by the way. It's always been small stuff, like the lightning to King Ghidorah transformation when he was first introduced, or like scenes of buildings being destroyed. And I understand that, like a building blowing up looks the same. You can take that clip and you can put it into another movie just fine. These are whole fight scenes, which are like the big moments of these movies. And they're just throwing them in here like, oh, hey, Godzilla's fighting Ebirah. Again, in this child's imagination. It's doubly fake.
And, to be fair, home video, still not a thing. So I bet a ton of the kids watching this truly didn't notice, and I wonder how many adults noticed, because it's not like they could go back and rewatch the previous Godzilla movies a lot, and it's not like they're watching all of them in a matter of, 1 week after another the way that we are.
Okay.
So
well, home video isn't that widespread, but TVs are widespread at this point. Like, a big part of Godzilla's reach these days was the movie reruns.
That's fair. That's very fair.
Like, yeah, maybe
I don't.
Maybe not everyone has the Godzilla
I don't even know
VHS,
why I'm defending them.
Yeah, exactly. But they're rerunning all these Godzilla movies on TV.
Yeah, that's very fair.
So, inspired by his dad, Manila decides to grow up. Literally. He can grow to his regular kaiju size in this movie, and then he goes to confront Gabara. Unfortunately, Manila sucks at fighting.
Yeah, he's lame. He's the worst. He's a little bitch ass.
We're getting comments on our TikToks, by the way. Like, we released that short where we roast Manila for looking like a microwaved frog, and we have gotten a few comments of people being like, "But I like Manila." Sad face.
Oh, I didn't notice because I was busy at my cousin's wedding having a robust social life, so I did not notice.
Okay. Listen, we're doing a Godzilla podcast, all right? How about you step out of the glass house before you start throwing stones there, Kayla?
Absolutely. That's why I can roast. It's the pot calling the kettle black. It's self-induced, it's self-inflicted as well. Like, I'm self-aware. I'm very aware of my nerdy thing.
May she who has not started a Godzilla podcast cast the first stone.
Exactly. Yeah, no, this is gentle, loving roasting happening. Please do not take offense. I am with you here. It is very funny though, because when I was at the wedding and people were like, "What do you do?" I did not mention the Godzilla podcast because I was in...
Oh, come on.
Listen, everybody that was there, it was a bunch of people that worked for city government, and then also a bunch of people that worked like conservation, and a bunch of outdoor people, and then a bunch of like city government people. And I was like, I don't think any of these people... I mentioned like D&D once, and that got like, "Oh, okay," I'm like, I'm not gonna mention the Godzilla. I don't think this is the audience to spread the Godzilla agenda.
We have people working in conservation, and the next like 5 Godzilla movies we're gonna be talking about are about pollution.
I'm gonna be real with you though. I'm pretty sure my cousins are not I know my cousins.
Okay, all right, whatever. So, where was I?
I did talk about it when I was visiting this summer. Now that I think about it, though, I did talk about it already this summer with some of them that I was doing the podcasts. So I just wasn't really retreading ground. Anyway.
Listen, Kayla, we're the ones that have to do the most advertising for this. This is our podcast. We have to spread it as far as we can. And by the way,
I tell people at work about it.
There we go. Quick word on advertising, by the way. We have a Ko-fi. If you go to our Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/Digital Kaiju Studios, link in the show notes, you can send us a few bucks to join our exclusive Discord and talk about Godzilla and other nerdy stuff with our exclusive club. You can also give us a few bucks to check out some of our bonus episodes, including some on Mothra and the original King Kong. We have another podcast, Writing for Roleplay, where we talk about writing for tabletop role-playing games like D&D, as Kayla mentioned earlier. And we have a bonus episode there where we talk about Curse of Strahd. And we will be having new bonus episodes coming out to that playlist soon. So definitely check it out, folks.
I will say this, it's very funny. When it comes up at work, like people looking at Godzilla stuff, I'm always like, "Oh, my friend Kevin has a Godzilla podcast. Like, you should check it out. It's called Gorilla Well." I never mention that I am the co-host because then it sounds a little too... People don't like being sold to.
No, so they like being
if I'm like,
tricked
"Oh,
instead.
I have a podcast." Yeah.
Fair enough.
They don't see my name. Nobody ever sees my name tag. They don't know.
Put a hand over your name tag. Oh yeah, there's this incredible person who is talking about
It's always
Godzilla.
My lanyard's always flipped around anyway. They never see the name.
Incredible.
Nobody pays attention.
All right. So speaking about, I can't do that transition. So anyway, going back to Manila getting his ass kicked.
Back on topic.
Manila sucks at fighting. His atomic smoke rings, dude.
Because Manila sucks. I respect that you guys like him, but he sucks.
Yeah, he's just Showa Manila is just not good. Well,
He's pathetic and not in a fun wet cat Blorbo way. Okay, sorry, Kevin. I'm done. I'm done derailing and bullying our listeners.
so Manila.
I'll stop shoving you in a locker now.
God damn it. So Manila, his atomic smoke rings do nothing to Gabara. They usually do nothing. He got the kill shot on King Ghidorah once in the far-off future year of 1999, but only after Godzilla and his girl gang of like 9 other monsters held the monster down for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gabara, who has electricity powers, just like King Kong, makes short work of Manila. He just kind of grabs Manila and then like tases him with his taser hands.
Yeah, it was a little... I don't love Manila, but I did feel really bad for him there. It was kind of brutal.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, they're just... I mean, it was full electric chair situation happening there.
Yeah, Gabara's kind of a dick.
It was brutal. Yeah.
So...
Yeah, to be clear, Manila does not deserve what Gabara is doing to him. This is excessive.
Mm-hmm. So Manila...
Leave that poor microwaved frog alone.
So Manila and Ichiro run away after that brutal beatdown. We then get more of Manila and Ichiro watching Godzilla. Godzilla fights some fighter jets, which is lifted from Ebirah. Ichiro then watches Godzilla teach Manila how to use his atomic breath. Weirdly enough, they shot new footage of this scene down to Godzilla stepping on Manila's tail in order to get him to use his actual atomic breath. This movie has very confusing priorities.
Yeah, I don't know who was in charge of the budget, but they should have done better. They could have reshot a fight scene.
So Ichiro, well, we do have some original fight scenes coming up. Everything with Gabara was shot for this film, but not enough. Yeah, Ichiro is grasped by a plant monster, and as he wakes up, it's revealed he's actually been grabbed by the 2 robbers that have broken into his home. Suddenly, this movie is very serious. The robbers kidnap Ichiro and take him back to the abandoned factory, intending to use him as a hostage. Even though he's just been kidnapped, Ichiro decides to take another nap. Back on imaginary Monster Island, Ichiro encounters Manila fighting Gabara once again. Ichiro drops a boulder from a nearby cliff directly onto Manila's tail, activating his atomic breath. Apparently, his true powers are only available through child abuse. Like, when I'm watching this scene, I thought he was, like, going to push the boulder onto Gabara. No, he's pushing the boulder onto Manila's tail.
Honda is tackling social issues for sure, but there are some that perhaps, need a little bit of further work.
We're going to touch on this after the summary, but I do love the actual lessons that Honda is trying to teach in this movie, but we'll get to that. So...
It's very old school.
Very old school. So anyway, Godzilla arrives on the scene, and Manila asks for help. But like a good father, Godzilla tells Manila to get back in there and beat the hell out of his own bully. Manila rushes in, biting and scratching, but it's not enough. Not until they do some Looney Tunes bullshit. Manila jumps on one end of a rock seesaw and, with Ichiro's help, sends Gabara flying into the air. Godzilla is so proud of his son for beating up Gabara. But then, Gabara decides to pick a fight with Godzilla and bites his leg. Bad move. Godzilla easily beats the crap out of Gabara and ends him with a judo flip. It's that most brutal thing in this movie.
Yeah. I did not feel sorry for him, though. Gabara had it coming.
He had it coming. Gabara's a dick.
He had it coming.
So, learning the childhood lesson that some problems need to be solved with violence, Ichiro wakes back up and remembers he's being held hostage. The bank robbers attempt to steal Shinpei the toymaker's car, but Ichiro gets away by fighting like Manila and biting their hands. Kids, if you get kidnapped, bite.
Yeah.
He then jukes these bank robbers throughout the factory, at one point pushing them down a hole, and at another point shooting a fire extinguisher at them like it was Godzilla's atomic breath. Shinpei the toymaker calls the cops after his car is almost stolen. The police arrive and catch the bank robbers, who are too busy failing at catching a child to avoid the police. Ichiro becomes a local hero. His mom vows not to work nights ever again. Reporters swarm Ichiro for an interview the next day, and all Ichiro can say is that he fought the robbers with Manila's help. All the adults are, of course, pretty confused, but Shinpei the toy maker is like, don't worry about it. Maybe Manila is like a god to children or something. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, the reporters all take him very literally, and the toy maker guy is like, oh, he was inspired by Manila. Adults take refuge in gods, so maybe monsters are like gods to kids,
Mm-hmm.
It helped him out in spirit, kind of a thing.
It's interesting because, like I said, it's not clear whether in this movie Godzilla and the rest of the monsters are real phenomenon, or if this takes place in a world where Godzilla and the rest of them are part of movies, or whether they are all just in this kid's imagination. Actually, I think there's a scene where he has a Godzilla toy. So at the very least, Godzilla is a known quantity in this universe.
Yeah.
In the final scene, Ichiro confronts the gang of bullies once more. Now that he knows prison rules, Ichiro beats up the biggest bully in a fight. He then honks a motorcycle horn and startles a man into spilling paint on himself, just like the bullies were trying to make him do at the beginning of the movie. Gaining their respect, Ichiro walks to school with the rest of the children, but not before the man who spilled paint all over himself tries to chase him down, and Ichiro passes by the train tracks where his conductor dad is currently working, and Ichiro is like, hey dad, this man is chasing me, I made him spill paint on himself, please take care of this problem for me, bye!
Yeah, what a message.
What a message.
Yeah, so it's unclear if kaiju are real in this world. Like, we see the Godzilla toy.
Yeah.
But the reaction of all of the adults and the fact that all of the kaiju scenes are in this boy's imagination, it's unclear whether this is really meta and Godzilla is a movie character and this kid is really into the kaiju movies, or if kaiju are real and this kid's just really into kaiju the way that some kids are really into, like, wolves or dinosaurs. But yeah, it's kind of funny, like, when he's like, oh yeah, Miniela helped me, and all the reporters are like, what? And then the neighbor has to be like, so he was inspired by Miniela the way that you or I are inspired by God. It was very funny that they went with the gods.
Yeah. It's fascinating because, okay, so because the Godzilla toy, we know that these monsters are not just part of his imagination in this world. They are a known entity that exists outside this kid's dissociation. So either these are the movie monsters, in which case it's like, oh, I was okay, Spider-Man helped me, like that kind of thing. Or
yeah, like what would Spider-Man do? Spider-Man would do, be brave, etc.
Yeah. Or these are real monsters with real body counts, in which case this kid is like a fan of Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Katrina's son, who also saved the world at one point from a space hurricane. The metaphor falls apart there.
And also, they made toys.
They made toys.
Not to talk about Pacific Rim again, but that was in Pacific Rim, they made Jaeger and Kaiju toys once the whole attacking a city thing kind of like became a normalized part of life and Jaeger pilots became like celebrities and things like that. They started selling Jaeger and Kaiju toys. So, if Kaiju are real in this universe and aren't movie characters, then Ishiro Honda did kind of hit the nail on the head, I think, of how our world would sort of react to kaiju. Because I think Guillermo del Toro hit the nail on the head there when saying that, oh yeah, this aspect of life would become normalized and you would be able to buy it at Target for your kid for Christmas. Like it would become commercialized because that would be the only way that we could cope with it.
Yeah.
And I think we see stuff like that happening like with COVID, that it became so normalized in our lives. So that makes sense to me, but it is weird that we don't quite get clarification on what it is exactly that's going on. Because yeah, this movie's connection to the canon, like to everything else that's happening, is tenuous.
And we already have a weird connection with the canon, not only as these movies were coming out, because there were parts of canon that would be ignored, like, hey, didn't this monster get his throat ripped out and his body obliterated by atomic breath? Oh, he's back. He's good as new. He's friends with Godzilla now. Okay.
Yeah.
But also, like I said earlier, Destroy All Monsters takes place in the future year of 1999. And the rest of the Showa movies take place around the year that the movie itself comes out. So all of the Showa Godzilla movies from here on take place before Destroy All Monsters. Destroy All Monsters is the chronological end to the Showa era, which means that the ending to Showa Godzilla is him and the rest of the kaiju becoming a mind-controlled army for a worldwide governmental organization, which, Mm-hmm. But anyway, this movie is even weirder because, like we said, we don't know whether this takes place in a world where the kaiju are real or whether they are movie figures. I think it is much funnier if this takes place in a world where the kaiju are real, because then that means, like you said, we have action figures of these giant monsters that have body counts.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like in Godzilla versus King Kong when they were like, oh, we need to exploit King Kong to make money and sell papers and, things like that. It's just, yeah, it's what society would do, probably.
Yeah.
Speaking of society, the latchkey kid of it all. I was just going to go off about the mom being at the end of the movie. His mom is like, oh, I'll stop working late so I can be home with you because obviously you got kidnapped by robbers because I wasn't home with you, you were getting into trouble and all of this stuff. And I really don't like that the onus was on the mom being like, oh, I will choose to stay home now. And that is something that I can totally do. I was only working late because I really liked to do it and wanted to do it. Which, one, the fact that it's all on the mom instead of the dad for always working and being late. Okay, sexist. And then two, this is again with the mom, of it being this idea that the mom could have always done this, like that the mom had a choice and it wasn't economic stressors that led to her having to work late because they needed a dual income household because one guy was like the dad was not able to make enough money from his job to support both of them, or that the mom was not able to work part-time or anything like that. Because and I mean, this is like an issue, I've come from a dual income household. My mom would have liked to be a stay-at-home mom. She told me if she could, she would have, but she had to work. And that's fine. I don't care. That's the reality of our economy. Is it's not the 1950s anymore. People are not able to make enough money at their job to support a family off of one income. Some people can, a lot of people cannot. It is becoming harder and harder for people to even support themselves off of a dual income household, let alone a single income household. And the idea that, oh, you should just get a better job is absurd because people are when you adjust for inflation right now, it's ridiculous how much people are being underpaid in comparison to what they were being paid in the 1950s or 60s in America. And I imagine it's a similar story elsewhere.
Well, it's like that Mark Twain quote. It's history doesn't repeat itself, but it also rhymes.
Yeah. And you get the same thing happening now with this the ultra-right conservative reaction that has been happening the last 10 years or so in America of oh, women should be at home with the children and they should not be working so much and all of this. We're hearing all of this again. And okay, what are you, Mr. Man, making enough money to support me and the children in our house with your money? If you want me to be a stay-at-home mom, then you need to be a provider that can do that. And a lot of jobs, it's just impossible to do that, You want me to stay home and clean unpaid all of the time? Well, are you bringing in that sort of income that would support me? Because if you're not, it's not fucking happening. It's absurd.
It's interesting how this movie undercuts its own message, too. Because I understand doing the message of, hey, latchkey kids, if your parents are working 2 full-time jobs to make ends meet, you need to toughen up as the world also gets tougher. I can understand that message. In a lot of children's media that I consumed growing up, the message around bullying was a lot of times like, hey, you should tell an adult, which never worked. Or, hey, you should empathize with your bully because maybe they have like a bad home life. And then, that kind of ignores the true reality of bullying, where sometimes bullies bully because they suck or because they're targeting you for other reasons, such as, I don't know, you being a minority or just you being an easy target. I will say this, in my own personal experience, whenever I had bullies like get to the point where they were physically messing with me, I would punch them in the face and then they would stop bullying me.
Yeah.
So I think this message is a good message to actually be teaching kids. And the fact that it's being taught in this movie is very funny to me.
Yeah.
But it undercuts itself by one, having the mom take on the onus of, oh no, I shouldn't have been working full time. I'm going to stop now. Like she has a choice.
Yeah, it's so I was just gonna say, it's so weird. Like, Ishiro Honda wants to tackle these social issues, but he completely ignores why these social issues exist and that it is not an individual failure, but a societal failure. Like, latchkey kids don't exist because women are deciding that they want to work rather than be home with their children. Latchkey kids exist because parents can't afford to have one of them stay home with the kids. They both have to work in order to make ends meet. And then the other thing too is, yes, I agree. The message of like, you need to stand up to your bullies, 100%. Very weird that once this kid stands up to his bullies and like gains their respect, he then harasses this adult because the bullies, like the other kids wanted him to. And it's at the beginning of the movie, these other kids, they're like, oh, go honk. They're trying to get him to go honk a horn on the motorcycle, and he won't do it. And, the implication is basically like they kind of want to get this kid in trouble, maybe. And the kid is like, I don't want to go honk the horn. It could startle the man on the ladder, and the kids are like, yeah, that's why it would be funny, because it would be funny to make this guy like fall and potentially hurt himself or whatever, And the kid doesn't want to do it because he doesn't want to hurt that guy. And then at the end of the movie, what he does is he goes up and he honks the horn on the motorcycle, startles the man on the ladder with the paint, and the guy falls and he gets paint all over himself. And I mean, he doesn't hurt himself, but it's still so weird that it's like in standing up for his bullies, he also loses, like presumably he was being bullied because he's kind of like a sensitive, nerdy kid or whatever, but then he loses that sensitivity in standing up for himself and harasses that guy, and then like runs off and his dad has to cover his ass for it. Like, what? It's a very weird mixed message.
It's a mixed message. He becomes the alpha bully after standing up for himself. Like, we see the gang of bully kids follow him to school at the end. That's like the ending shot of the film. So it's like, it's not that he got the gang off of his back. It's that he became the leader of the gang. And then, he gets out of the consequences of messing with the adult when his dad comes in and says like, hey, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what my kid did, but I'll pay for your laundry and all that stuff, which kind of has a mirror to Manila beating up Gabara. And then Godzilla comes in. It's like, I'm so proud of you. And then Gabara picks a fight with Godzilla, and then Godzilla judo flips him. But even then, that's like, at that point, that's just gravy. Like, Godzilla beats him up because then he starts messing with Godzilla.
Yeah.
In this ending scene with the human kid, the adult father has to come in and solve the situation for him, which undercuts the message that this movie is trying to make.
Yeah, it's also weird because, like, at no point in time does it ever seem to be that the whole thing is you should stand up to your bullies, and then he, like, becomes the leader of the pack. So it's not necessarily, hey, don't bully other people. Like, because again, Honda's doing this thing where he's trying to talk about social issues, but he's not really addressing the root cause. The lesson he's getting away with here is stick up to bullies and be tougher than them, and then like harass other people so they don't mess with you. Not, hey, don't bully other people. Like the root cause of bullying is bullies, not other people not sticking up for themselves.
And we touched on this a little bit in Son of Godzilla, but I can understand Godzilla teaching his kid, hey, you need to be the toughest kid on the block because this world is full of monsters who want to mess with you. And if you don't want that, you need to be tough enough to become king of the monsters. Not necessarily a lesson you want to teach children.
Yeah.
So it like, once again, the message undercuts itself. And the rest of this movie undercuts itself by putting in a bunch of footage from the previous movies and giving this weird tonal dissonance. And
there's also the whole, like, so at the beginning, you know, there's a song about the kaiju, and it's a little song. It's telling us all about the kaiju. And then it takes a hard left and shows all of this footage of factories and smog and pollution. It's like, but worse than all of the kaiju is the smog and the pollution, which I was like, okay, wasn't expecting the environmentalism message in this, but okay. Came a little bit out of nowhere, but I'll roll with it. And there's some comments about kids getting asthma and things like that. And then it sort of drops off a little after that.
It drops off with the narrative, but also all of the sets in the real world, like, to emphasize how much this kid's life is not that great. Like, literally every single location he's at is either like a gravel pit or an abandoned factory or a train yard or a cramped apartment.
Yeah.
This is an industrial sector.
That is true. It is, they like stop talking about it overtly, but there is absolutely, you're right. There is kind of this idea throughout the whole film that this isolation has been caused by over-industrialization. And that's like a further thing. I remember, just as like a side little tangent here, I remember in college reading this book. I can't remember the title of it now. But the whole point of the book was like, oh, kids don't go and play outside anymore, and that's bad, and why won't they do that, and children, and video games, and blah, blah, blah. And I remember going off on my teacher and being like, this is so, like, this idea that kids don't play outside anymore is terrible because you're blaming children for not playing outside when it's like, well, where can they go play outside? Like, if you don't live in a rural area that has green outdoor spaces, if you live in the suburbs, you know, then it is reliant on there being a park. Like, I loved playing outside. I grew up in Phoenix. It was really fucking hot for 6 months of the year. And it was completely absurd to be outside in the summer. Like, summer vacation was spent indoors until at nighttime when the pool was actually cool enough that it was worth it to go swimming in the pool. Like, I wasn't going outside in the afternoon in the summer because it was 115 degrees. That wasn't my fault, you know? And then also there was limited, I lived in the suburbs, so there was a couple of parks, but if you live in the city, if you don't have access to a park, and then also like, you know, we're talking about like latchkey kids and things like that, and a big thing that was happening, at least in America in the 80s and 90s with latchkey kids, was this concept of like, or this whole thing where it was like kids were going missing because they were being unsupervised, and they had to run those whole ads of like, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? And all of that. So it's like when we were growing up, at least in my personal experience, it felt like there was a little bit of a reaction. And maybe it's different because I was a young girl and you were a young boy. I was not allowed to like wander by myself. And I was only allowed to wander with friends when I was like in middle school. You know, like I wasn't allowed to be like 10 years old running around the neighborhood getting into trouble because my parents were afraid I was going to get kidnapped by a pedophile. Like I was made to stay inside. And guess what? My brother got to run around with greater range at a younger age than I did because my parents were less concerned about a boy getting kidnapped over a girl getting kidnapped. And like, that's not my parents' fault that, you know, society is unsafe or anything like that, but just it's this greater point of like blaming individuals for societal failure. It's the whole thing with the like, oh, this, you should be a stay-at-home mom or you shouldn't work so much. Never mind the fact that there's probably economic reasons that are forcing you to do this, you know. And there's a comment by one of like a news anchor early on in the film. It says, "The crazy behavior of young people all over the world is creating problems." This movie came out in 1969. America is in Vietnam at the time and dealing with civil rights issues. And I believe you mentioned something to me earlier about there being a lot of student protests in Japan at the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of student protests in Japan at the time for a variety of reasons, some of which is America's involvement in the Vietnam War. But also just because this is 1969, we're about to go into the 70s, there's a lot going on. So there's a lot of student protesters. So there is this sort of like almost anti-youth sentiment at the time. In fact, there's another quote from the book Ichiro Honda, A Life in Film from Godzilla to Kurosawa. Quote, Ichiro's nemesis and Manila's tormentor are both called Gabara. The normally apolitical Sekizawa, who is the screenwriter who writes a lot of these Godzilla movies, supposedly borrowed the name, originally Gebara, either from Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara or the German word Gewalt, which means violence, both popular with Japanese student protesters at the time. So it's kind of like if the new kaiju for this movie was named Marl Barks, as a sort of dig at the student protesters at the time. Just a little like, got him.
God. It's infuriating because Ichiro Honda wants to talk about social issues, but he feels so, in my opinion, it's so clear that he's like really disconnected from everyday people and from these social issues that he wants to talk about, because he's just he's sitting here talking about environmentalism, and then he's taking a swipe at student activists that are protesting the shitty conditions of society. And then he's like, I want to talk about latchkey kids because, this is an important societal issue. And then he just completely ignores the fact that Japan's economy is not doing so great. And that's why parents are being forced to work late and to have both of them be working because they can't afford not to both be working. It's completely like, it's really very disappointing because Ichiro Honda had previously, and listen, it's not like this guy was without faults, we've talked about the blackface, and it wasn't all of his, like, the blackface happened in films that he didn't direct as well. And, some of the sexism that I've talked about in the past in some of these films. But for somebody who was so, especially like when you look at the original Godzilla and its nuanced approach to atomic anxiety so soon after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and before like all of this censorship, and he talks about censorship in the Japanese government and criticism of the Japanese government and the American governments and all of this. And then for him to, years down the line, criticize students for protesting the government and society and to completely ignore the root causes of these societal problems that he wants to talk about, it's very disappointing.
Yeah. Well, this is a movie that tells kids to stand up for themselves. And if that means like biting hands or beating up the biggest bully, then do it, especially as the world gets harder. And, to be fair, the naming origin of Gabara, like Gabara isn't holding up like a red flag and, getting all of his kaiju comrades together to do some collective action against Godzilla. It's more of a naming inspiration thing to give to the bully. But I understand like where you're coming from with that.
But they do deliberate, like they do have a line of dialogue that's very much like, the crazy behavior of young people is causing problems, not these problems are causing young people to stick up for themselves.
Yeah, and the solution is that the moms need to go back to being stay-at-home moms.
Yeah.
So that way someone is looking after these kids and the parents don't have to form a relationship with the neighborhood toy maker to watch over their kids for them.
Yeah, and there's no reason that moms were working late. They were just choosing to do that, and they could very easily choose to stay home. It's so easy. Like, yeah. It's
this movie makes us mad in a lot of different angles. For me, it's mostly the reusing of all of the fight footage and monster footage, except when we're redoing the scene of Godzilla teaching Manila how to use his atomic breath. For some reason, we got to reshoot that.
Listen, I can forgive being cheap. I cannot forgive hypocrisy and bad arguments.
Well, I can't wait then for our next movie.
Oh, no.
Because boy, if we touch on environmental issues in this movie, we are going to be heading head first into them in the next one. But before we get into that, Kayla, what would you rate All Monsters Attack?
Can I rate it 0?
Yeah, this is our podcast.
I guess I'll rate it 0.
I'll also rate it 0.
Yeah.
Divorced from everything, this concept would have been a good children's movie concept. But because they made it a Godzilla film about an imaginary Godzilla teaching this kid to deal with his bullies, and then used a bunch of footage from the previous movies, and then undercut its own message that it was trying to there's just I'm just mad after watching this movie, and that's how you get a 0 on my Godzilla movie rating scale, is if you actively piss me off.
This movie of a child using his dreams and imagination and escapism in order to find internal strength against difficult circumstances and bullies. That is the plot of Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
A
film
shit.
which I adore, and many children also adore. It can be done. And in fact, is that movie good? I don't know. I haven't seen it in years. Did I love that movie? Absolutely. This movie, not good.
Not good.
And I mean, maybe kids liked it at the time. I feel like this one has not lasted in the same way that Shark Boy and Lava Girl will have a renaissance in about 5 to 10 years as more millennials have children and show it to them.
I completely forgot about that movie until you mentioned it, but now you say it out loud. Yeah, no, Shark Boy and Lava Girl
It's the same thing.
what All Monsters Attack failed at.
Yeah. He's literally, like, he's dreaming. He's dreaming, and through his dreams, he's working through his issues to find the strength to stand up against the bullies. It's the same thing.
And even then, there's that weird thing where it's like the dream people are real because they show up in the real world at the end of the film.
He manifests them.
Yeah, which would have been very interesting if this movie ended with this latchkey kid manifesting Godzilla in the middle of his industrial neighborhood.
Also, we didn't talk on this, but Minilla speaks in this movie.
Yeah.
Which was very weird. It's funny because he started talking, and my first thought was, Minilla speaks English? And I was like, wait, no, he speaks Japanese. I'm reading subtitles. So I did have a very American moment right there. And it makes sense. I mean, it's Dream, so Dream Minilla can talk to the kid. Like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it is kind of funny because the kaiju, never talk except this one. Only Minilla speaks, too.
Yeah.
None of the other kaiju speak Japanese. It's only Minilla.
Yeah, they always need the twin fairies to interpret for them. So,
yeah.
I mean, they couldn't afford the peanuts for this movie, I guess, or the duo that they got to replace them.
Yeah, so they made Minilla talk.
Yeah, they made Manila talk, which I think it's great that they didn't just have Manila do his weird rusty bike horn noises for the entire movie.
Yeah. No, I don't think it was a bad choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was fine. It was
if this was just an original movie where these were original monsters that he was imagining, then it would have been an all right movie. But because they decided to make this a Godzilla film and use a bunch of clips from previous Godzilla movies, this is a clip show episode from a TV show.
Yeah,
it's just bad. It's just bad.
It's so weird.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. What's the next movie we're watching, Kayla?
All right. Where did that tab go? Okay. Next, we'll be watching Godzilla vs. Hedorah, aka Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, 1971. Be sure to watch the Japanese language version, not the English language version. If you liked this podcast, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, leave a comment, and share with a friend. Follow us on social media. We got the links in the show notes. We also have a Ko-fi. You can support us there and get access to cool bonus content like extra episodes and access to the private Discord, where you can talk with other geeks about Godzilla and all things Digital Kaiju. Check it out! Gorilla Whale is a production of Digital Kaiju Studios. It is hosted and produced by Kevin Carpenter and Kayla Knudsen. Gorilla Whale has no official affiliation with Toho, Legendary, or any other companies associated with the Godzilla franchise. We thank you for watching along with us. Until next time, watch out for kaiju.
Watch out for kaiju.